It wasn't working. I struggled with focus in high school and energy, with pain problems. My back was already an issue in high school. I thought that was huge. Like, you mean you have a choice about whether you're sick and you could choose to not be sick? Wouldn't people want that? Wouldn't I want to help people not get sick with heart disease and cancer? The effects of a high oxalate diet can be delayed for 30 years. You can think you're fine, and then all of a sudden you're broken.
From pain to gain, I changed the game. Carnivore life, never the same. Standard diet filled with lies, I see through the disguise.
Well, hi everybody, and welcome to Bold Carnivore. Today on Bold Carnivore Meets, we are talking to Sally K Norton, MPH. That's Masters of Public Health. She is the author of Toxic Superfoods, and she has quite a story for us. Hello, Miss Sally K.
Hello, good to see you.
Wow, it is awesome to meet you. I tried to reach out to you quite some time ago, and I know that you are very busy. Now, I don't know what your day job is, but I know that you're an author and you've written a fantastic book. I have read most of it.
Nice. Nice. Did you learn anything?
I have, but it has raised quite a few questions for me too.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sure they're interesting questions to think about.
yeah, it was wow. So many things that well, we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, I would like to know a little bit more about your story. How is it that you got into your line of work?
I chose to pursue prevention and nutrition as a seventh grader at age 12. My science teacher showed us a film strip. That's what we did in the day for visuals on the wall that said, if you eat these foods, the hot dogs and the junk food, you'll get cancer and heart disease. And if you eat these like vegetables and cabbage and stuff, you won't. And I thought that was huge. Like, you mean you have a choice about whether you're sick and you could choose to not be sick? Wouldn't people want that? Wouldn't I want to help people not get sick with heart disease and cancer? So I was immediately interested. I had been already interested in eating for good health as a kindergartner. Um, Coming home with any information, trying to eat well, loved my normal like dinner food, didn't care if I would fill up on the vegetables and the main dish and skip dessert so I could run and play. I really liked food and really wanted to be healthy. I honestly think it started because I had probably a series of strep throat and other kinds of childhood ickies, including ear infections, and they took my tonsils out when I was 5. And that was a horrible experience. Being barred from the pool was no fun. Having to be spoon-fed liquid penicillin, which tastes god awful, especially when you're 4, and then going through the tonsillectomy, which was pretty traumatic. None of that suited me. I never wanted to be sick, so I was instantly ears perked up when they said, "Oh, you don't have to be sick if you eat this way." So I've been at it a long time now that I'm just about to turn 60.
Whoa, 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 whoa. In your experience, though, did eating that way actually address any health issues for you or anyone you know?
I never put that together that it wasn't working. It wasn't working. I struggled with focus in high school and energy, with pain problems. My back was already an issue in high school and before. And then in college, I was limping around with foot problems and had to leave Cornell for a 4-year medical leave and had bilateral foot surgery where they reconstructed or took bones out of my big toe area and underneath where you step. And I was eating really well. I was a vegetarian at that point and eating my vegetables, and I never connected the fact that, A, I needed the surgery because nothing was working. I wasn't responsive to the pain medication very well. I was on a lot of ibuprofen. That's about all they do for you. And then, I didn't really recover from that surgery well and didn't for 30 years until I got off of the foods I thought were good for me.
Hmm. Okay. What was the aha moment? How did you connect the idea that this food that I thought was healthy isn't?
Well, luckily, I had an attack of genital pain that was so bad that through a Google search, my husband helped me find the Vulvar Pain Foundation, which had been teaching women and men with pelvic pain issues to get off of high oxalate foods. And that wasn't news to me because what we learn at nutrition school, oxalate in foods chelates calcium and reduces the calcium in your diet, and it causes kidney stones. And you always put a kidney stone patient, you invite them to try avoiding high oxalate foods, which are spinach and chocolate and some vague stuff. You don't really get a very good sense of where the oxalate is. So I didn't know enough about it. And all I knew is you needed it for the kidney. And I was like, well, I don't have kidney stones. So I didn't understand the connection, but she clearly had figured out through experience and some research that there was connective tissue problems related to this pelvic pain, and that when they changed the diet to address the pelvic pain, the connective tissue situation got better. So people would no longer have symptoms of fibromyalgia, and their achy joints would be better, and their skin problems would get better. And I knew I had these connective tissue things for sure, but I didn't really see the connection. But I was learning about oxalate thanks to her because she has tested a lot of foods. So in the interim, I am trying to address the sleep disorder. After I learned about them, I still wasn't well and had to quit my job. I was really disabled, had to have a hysterectomy, and didn't come back from that well. And I was sent to the sleep lab for a sleep evaluation because they couldn't see anything in the labs to explain why I was not well. And it turns out my brain wasn't settling into sleep very well, and it was waking up 29 times per hour all night long. So no wonder I was so tired and couldn't focus, couldn't work anymore, couldn't exercise. I was really disabled. And in the 3 years of trying to figure out how to sleep again, I made this connection between the oxalates in my food because now I knew where they were, and my joint pain. Because I was going to a hot yoga class to try to rehabilitate myself, and I was taking kiwis every day to try to deal with the gut problems because their kiwis are supposed to help you with chronic constipation and things like that. And I knew I was adding oxalate. So as I was doing this over time, my arthritis and stiffness and everything was getting worse and worse and worse. And I was laying in bed one night going, why am I in so much pain again? This is like being a vegetarian all over again. Why am I in pain? And it dawned on me that it was adding the kiwi slash oxalate. I'm like, are you kidding? I've been in joint pain since I was a kid because of my healthy produce. I was floored. I was like, "What?" And I was concerned, like, wait a minute, I have to do this arthritis diet and kidney stone diet, but I have a sleep problem. I'm trying to fix my sleep problem. How am I going to do that? So I was like, I thought I had 10 different problems, and so I resentfully got more serious, got rid of the kiwi. I had some celery back in my diet and sweet potatoes and got rid of them. And in under 10 days, I could tell I was sleeping better because I was able to read again. I was able to focus. My brain was coming back online. And wait a minute, I was doing this low oxalate diet for the joint pain, but it was helping my sleep. And then within months, all of a sudden my feet are much better. And I find myself wearing heels at a wedding all night long. It was 7.5 hours in heels, walking around the parking garage, up and down stairs, up and down at the event. That had never happened in my entire adulthood. Many other things were just magically getting better. On not eating, my main ones in my diet really weren't the kiwi and the celery. They were a lifetime habit of having Swiss chard routinely once a week at least, and sweet potatoes as my main starch because I was now sensitive to wheat and gluten and beans and didn't have many carbs, and I thought I needed the sweet potatoes for energy and for starch. And getting rid of sweet potatoes and Swiss chard turned out to be the way to reverse a lifetime of suffering for the most part.
Wow. That just wow.
I know. So I was like, wait a minute. I have a degree in nutrition and public health. I've worked in integrative medicine. I've helped attempt to bolster the education of nurses and doctors and other health professionals within the medical system to incorporate lifestyle and other sort of holistic and traditional therapies, Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese medicine and the old school healthcare that pre-existed the modern science ideas. And I'm connected with all kinds of holistic healers, integrative medicine healers, functional medicine doctors, regular doctors. I work in hospitals. I worked in 2 major medical schools. I didn't know this, and no one in my circles knew this. No one knew to help me. None of the people I went to for help, all the 17 chiropractors I saw, etcetera. If they couldn't help me, I couldn't help myself. How is anyone else gonna figure this out? So I felt really obligated to start figuring out how to teach this and study it and doing free outreach in my community to let people know, "Look, if you're stuck and you're trying hard, this could be why."
Hmm. So nobody in your circles really had the answer for your particular problem. But in your book, you talk about sources of oxalic acid and oxalates in general being used as poisons specifically and intentionally. So is it that nobody knows? Or is it that it's difficult to parse out? Or is it intentional to some extent in some way that these things are proffered as though they are healthy, though that's just not the case?
Well, that's a really complicated, multifaceted question, and I do think that we get a sort of deliberate amnesia in a world where it's all about commerce all the time.
Mm,
So we selectively emphasize things as a society because the messages coming at us are mostly marketing messages, all of it. And so marketing is influencing what information you're getting, including in the basic healthcare field. You've got a certain problem called gout. And historically, there's 5 types of crystals that cause inflammatory problems in joints that create gout-like reactions. But once we had a drug that would address uric acid gout, we decided that was the real gout and everything else was not important and, you know. So we've changed what used to be called the oxalate gout to something that isn't existing anymore. Like we extinguish stuff that doesn't fit the commerce model at every level. We're, a lot of influencers are doing this. They don't want to hear information that says, "Well, collagen is going to turn into oxalate in the body. We're pushing collagen, or we're pushing vitamin C, which is another one that turns into oxalate in the body and is also very toxic at high levels." Well, if you're pushing vitamin C IVs on your patients, you're not interested to hear that because your model of commerce is being threatened by that. So it's very easy to be threatened by something that's simple and free. That is, change what you're eating in terms of oxalate, and you can avoid gout and gout medications. You can avoid arthritis. You can avoid lots of other surprising problems. So it's never going to be popular in a commerce based world to offer a free solution. That is not going to happen. But the other thing too is we've layered so much culture onto food itself. There's an inherent resistance in every culture. You're not going to tell me my traditional use of turmeric is bad for me. You're not going to tell
mm,
me my love of potatoes is bad for me. I'm not going to hear it. Oh my gosh, everybody loves spinach. Forget you. You can't be right because my culture says otherwise. So we're not open to new scientific facts that aren't even new. They've been true since before antibiotics. But people were getting themselves sick on rhubarb a lot in the early 1800s, and that's when the whole diagnosis of oxalate poisoning from food, called the oxalic acid diathesis, is a thing. Like, we've known it's a thing for a long time, and it got dropped out of medicine. It was never really popular because it is indeed incredibly hard to study this. Oxalate is a sneaky enemy to have. It has very stealthy effects. They're delayed, they're subtle. The effects of a high oxalate diet can be delayed for 30 years. You can think you're fine, and then all of a sudden you're broken. So it's not just some kind of conspiracy against this. It's that the enemy itself is such a clever enemy. And the body is so clever, attempting to have us function well despite the problem underneath the surface that it's not telling you about. And you don't know. I didn't know when I was eating oxalate or not. You have no way to figure out what it is that's bothering you. Even if you were wondering, well, it's probably my food. I probably need to eat differently, but you're clueless about what is that mystery thing that you don't understand because we have no distinction what's a high oxalate food, what isn't. It's not on labels. You are in the dark.
mm. So Do we have a basic family grouping of different foods that are high oxalate, or particular parts of foods that are generally high in oxalates that we can avoid? Or should you just avoid all plants to just get rid of it? Say, I'm just going to be on the safe side, get rid of it all.
Well, a lot of people love the mental laziness part where, oh, I could just cut out plants. But that is also very weird for people. So it depends on the person, which way they're going with this. And fundamentally, it's important to understand that we're dealing with a poisoning problem and a bioaccumulation problem as we built up a lifetime of eating potatoes, peanuts, and chocolate, which here in the US would be a standard way to grow up, where you're getting chocolate cake on your first birthday and sweet potatoes is one of your first foods, and then given peanut butter as kid food, and then there's candies that are combining nuts and chocolate, and potatoes are everywhere now. They're such a profitable food, and they can be frozen and reheated, and they're in tater tots and hash browns and chips, which really have only been around about 60, 70 years, but now they're like standard. You either get chips or fries with most going out meals here because it's very profitable for restaurants. So you get a heavy load of this in the standard diet. So that means you're accumulating oxalate in the body because you're eating more than you can excrete through the urine and the kidneys. So you end up with oxalate deposits in your thyroid gland, in your bone marrow, in your eyes, in your bones, in your tendons. Who knows? It's idiosyncratic where it's really affecting you. And so thinking about how do you undo the situation and stop eating these high oxalate foods to get some both acute benefits and deal with the chronic toxicity that's left behind. So going too much from a high oxalate diet, that would be a high oxalate diet nowadays is usually gluten-free because there's a bunch of cassava and arrowroot and almonds and quinoa and buckwheat, and these are all high in oxalate. You got away from the bran, which is high oxalate, but now you're doing chia seeds and kiwi and pomegranate and starfruit and blackberry. These are all crazy high foods. And of course, spinach, beet greens, and Swiss chard are popular as the dark leafy greens. And if you're doing those kinds of foods or having like almond muffins and almond pancakes and almond bread, you are in a very dangerous situation of high consumption. And if you just kill all the plants and go down to zero oxalate, because there isn't oxalates that are meaningful in animal foods, and you go to full carnivore quickly, for some people, they get sick fairly fast and they can feel there's something wrong when they go full carnivore. Other people, they get away with zero oxalate for 2 years, 3 years, even 6 years. And just like the vegan who didn't know they were sick for 30 years and then suddenly the oxalates showed up, same thing can happen with going really low. So there are plenty of plant foods that are low in oxalate. So even people who are very plant centric in their style of eating and their comfort level, you can stick with a lot of plant foods and feel better. Vegans can feel better taking out the spinach, the Swiss chard, the sweet potatoes, and using lower oxalate foods, the lettuces and arugula and watercress and celery root and a lot of the cabbage family, they're very low in oxalate. So even kale is fairly low in oxalate relative to the others. But anything like the radishes, rutabaga, turnips, these are all cabbage family root things where you can fill up on them. And there's a few seeds like pumpkin seeds and so on. So there's definitely the veggie low oxalate diet. And those people do very well. They don't need to go full carnivore to get rid of the aches and pains and fatigue and sleep problems and so on that they've been having. But the getting enough meat and protein is so helpful for rebuilding your body and really doing well and getting nutrients that you need, because plants, even if they're low in oxalate, they have other problematic compounds, and the nutrient bioavailability in plant foods is really dicey, not that great. So you've got a sort of underlying toxicity in plants. That's their nature. They're not really designed to be perfect non-toxic foods for humans. That wasn't their intention. Their intention is their own survival. But there's also this bioavailability problem caused by fiber and vacuoles and the forms that the nutrients are in. They're hard to get out of the food. So a fully plant-based low oxalate diet can help you get away from pain and so on, but it may not help you rebuild your health.
Hmm. So you would suggest perhaps teetering down by using low oxalate foods and then probably upping the proteins?
Yeah, usually people don't eat enough protein, so adding more protein, especially for women, is usually advice anybody needs, and that usually means more meat or cheese or milk or something. And then with the oxalates, you just evaluate your diet. If you're eating almond snacks and spinach salads or spinach smoothies and buckwheat for breakfast and this and that. You just look at the things that you've been leaning on heavily routinely that are high oxalate and just pick one to get rid of it for a while or cut it in half or do an intermediate substitution to kind of come down in a way that won't be so abrupt that the body is like given permission to suddenly kind of vomit out some of this newer stuff that you've been eating that can create new toxicity because you don't want to raise the oxalate level in your blood, your kidneys, your urine, your bladder by the release of it from your tissues. So this mobilization of the sequestered or stored accumulated oxalate in the body is a little tricky. And those of us who've been eating well for so long are going to struggle with this process of releasing and recovering.
Hmm. I have heard that that is an issue, and I know that a lot of full carnivores do have attacks of oxalate dumping, so quote dumping, right? But is that what you would think that is suggestible? Using some low oxalate foods to try to tame that process a little bit.
We definitely want to tame the process and get enough oxalate back in the diet to tell the body, no, 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 leave that stuff alone. Don't be digging around in it. And you don't really need low oxalate. Low oxalate foods are actually not that useful because you'd have to eat a huge amount of cauliflower. You'd have to eat 2 cauliflower heads or 3 of them to get enough oxalate. And all that fiber is just going to cause more inflammation. That's not a good thing. So you want to use low fiber, more concentrated oxalate. Double strength tea is a great example. Some turmeric, whole root turmeric is a good example. Beet juice is a good example. Some of this more, because you can get away with smaller amounts of them. An ounce, 2 ounces of beet juice can be enough oxalate. You can use it as medication to medicate your way out of this tendency to over mobilize from the tissues and clear it out too fast. That too fast is very toxic. It causes a lot of immune engagement. And if this goes on chronically, you're at risk for causing additional derangements in the immune system that's called autoimmune disease. I mean, you start having serious problems with new autoimmune disease patterns showing up and potentially more reactivity, which could be reactivity to more foods and things. So if you keep the immune system a little bit, give them a little vacation here and there and don't let this heavy clearing symptoms carry on. Adding in some oxalate is excellent medication to do, and it's not going to make your problem worse. It's going to help you safely recover.
Mm. For recovery, about how long should somebody who's going through this process expect that recovery to take?
Yeah, it really depends on your individual history and how much you've overdone the oxalates, how much your body sequestered, which is really hard to judge. There's no way to know how much on board you have and how much is backed up from your diet, other than a very good rough back of the envelope kind of calculation using an exposure history. So I have an instrument on my website called the Symptoms and Exposure Inventory. It's also in the book Toxic Superfoods. And you can look at what are your risk factors, what have you been eating over the years, and what are your symptom patterns. And if you've been eating a lot of these foods and you've already got symptom patterns, it could take a very long time. I'm now in my 11th year, and I feel like I'm entering a phase of rebuilding at last, that the worst of the recovery is over, but I'm still releasing oxalate, I can tell. And my back is probably still loaded with it.
Oh. So are you still having some minor aches and pains and twinges then? Because you say you're in the rebuilding phase just now. That's a long time, right? Have you
It's a long
intentionally
time.
slowed the process?
Excuse me?
Have you intentionally slowed the process?
I have not been as good about doing that because when I was doing this, I was doing this alone with very little advice. Uh, and I've had to figure this out working with myself and with my clients. And it really works well with my clients to get them on slowing this down. So I have I keep some pomegranate juice in my refrigerator. And lately I've been experimenting with having some plantain chips in the pantry just in case I feel like I need to cut, because I do feel like I am occasionally getting into the oxalate stuff. And now that I feel like I'm trying to now, I'm coming around to being able to comfortably challenge my body and start working out. I haven't really been able to work out most of my adulthood. I mean, I swam a lot to try to help the foot problem, and I couldn't do that anymore. And all I had left was yoga. So I've been using yoga as consistently as I can, at least 3 times a week for years. But I feel like I can go past that now, but as I do that, you invite more oxalate clearing. The more you stress the tissue, the more you're gonna find old oxalate deposits in bones and tendons and muscles, and you're gonna bring back on that inflammation and so on. So it's a careful process of coming back into being able to really challenge your body and see what it can do, because it brings on this clearing process. So as I do that, I feel I need to have some oxalates around to try to counterbalance the tendency for this added stress of newly working out to prevent severe oxalate reactions. Yeah.
Wow. It's just an amazing process. It really
It
is.
is amazing. It is still amazing to me. I've been doing this so long, and it floors me what we're all going through and how different it is in each person. All of my clients have separate reactions in this process of recovery, and some of them are darn scary.
Hmm. Is there perhaps also some emotional and or mental issues that get worked through in this case?
Oh, this is a great question. Right from the beginning, I got surprised by a friend who went on this because she's really struggling with all kinds of issues, food addictions, and so on. And this helped her right away, feeling way less addicted to food and alcohol. She was like, this really cleared up this whole addictive style, whatever it was with her brain she'd been suffering with that for like 50 or 60 years at that point. And she told me that she later found a childhood memory of a terrible thing that happened to her when she was probably 4 that she didn't even know happened. And that cleared out. And so with the oxalate clearing of the lower toxicity of the brain starts working better. The brain is calmer, it's more able to make good choices. Less toxicity means happier brain. And what surprised me too is how many people have come to me and say, I've had so much anxiety for so long, and now I don't need therapy. I feel calm. People have said, I have not been happy ever since I was a kid. I've been basically slightly miserable all the time with a kind of depression. And now I'm suddenly alive and joyful. So the mental health side is really profound and so welcome, because it's a huge another source of human pain that's happening in the world. We have a lot of people with arthritis and physical pain, but we have just as many people struggling with mental and emotional pain and inability to really feel content in their life. And this brings that on for them. They can finally feel peace, contentment, and a sense of overwhelm and anxiety not dogging them like it was.
Hmm. Did you have any personal, emotional, or mental releases through this process too?
I mean, nothing really that dramatic that I know of, other than the fact that I could not really meditate well. Back when I was in graduate school, I would sit down with my TM mantra and attempt to meditate, and it would make me so much more fatigued. At this time, I was struggling so much with physical and mental fatigue. It was disabling. And when I would try to meditate, it would make it worse. I'd sit down, so I never understood that. But now the clarity, the being able to sit down and just clear your mind and be at peace and breathe and think about your breath and your body and just be still works. That's huge. And I hear this from a lot of people. And, sleep is another form of sort of mental activity. I was not consciously awake, but I was brain was awake, and just being able to get in bed and settle in and sleep is amazing.
Hmm. Do the oxalic crystals past the blood-brain barrier or get stuck in the brain sheath or something? Does it irritate the brain physically as well?
Yeah, this is a really good question. There's plenty of case reports, usually from people who have the genetic form of this disease, where they really go in and evaluate their tissues and do scans and so on. They don't do this with people that don't have the genetic thing. So we mostly have it from the primary hyperoxaluria patients. And there's plenty of reports of oxalate in the meninges, which is a layer of 3 thin little fascia sheaths around the brain and the spinal cord. So the brain meninges get the oxalate. Other fascia sheath all through the body can have the oxalate as well. So it makes sense. And then there's a spot in the little tiny spot in the middle of the brain that is what goes wrong when you get Parkinson's disease. And that little spot is known to collect oxalate. And so there's a real connection between Parkinson's and other forms of dementia and oxalate that's getting into the brain. With the eyes are another brain-like tissue. It's part of the central nervous system. It's the surface of the brain, really. And the eyes collect a lot of oxalate. And most researchers, as they analyze what they're seeing, they say, this isn't from the vitamin C in the eyes degrading into oxalate. This is oxalate coming from the bloodstream. So oxalic acid is what's mostly traveling in your blood. It's not the crystallized form. The crystals tend to be stuck on tissues and not traveling as whole crystals in the blood, as far as we know. And that acid is a very small molecule. It's only 2 carbons big. So this little tiny, a fat molecule has 18 carbons on it? Like, it's a tiny fraction of a single triglyceride molecule. Really small. And it seems to be able to get into cells regardless of whether a transporter is moving this charged molecule. You think of it, it's an ion that needs an ion transporter, like sodium and potassium are controlled by cell membrane. But it seems to be able to get in there regardless. But there are transporters that move it into and out of cells. But the oxalic acid, things that sodium and potassium don't do to cells is destroy the membrane. Oxalic acid in crystals, especially nanocrystals of oxalate, when they get near cell membranes, they don't have to touch. You just have to be electromagnetically close enough. Causes a scrambling of the organization of the fats that make up membranes. So a cell membrane is a bilayer of lipids in order to create this sort of fatty bubble that keeps water in and outside. And there's 2 layers of fats that do that. So you have the polar end of the fats on the outside of the membranes, inner and outer sides of the membranes. And so the individual little fats that are hanging around in the membranes get swapped around. So there's a whole bunch of them that are supposed to be only on the inside that flip to the outside. And that tells the immune system up, dead, dying, damaged cell, come take away the cell. So changes the function of the membranes enough that I think that's one reason why oxalate can get into cells so easily. And cells attempt to carry on even though their membranes are damaged, but then the membranes that make up mitochondria are damaged as well. You get this oxidative stress inside the cell. The mitochondria don't work very well. The oxalic acid sits on enzymes in the complex 2 in the work of the mitochondria that is supposed to produce the energy for the cell is blocked. Doesn't work, and you get a real brownout with all that inflammation, oxidative stress, and damage to mitochondria, damage to membranes, and the cells are like, slowly dying and die. So you can get a lot of damage, and that allows this oxalate to get into cells. The cells try to manage it, put it in liposomes and sequester it and do these things, but you're disturbing the calcium in the cells. So you get oxalic acid moving in there, it's going to draw calcium toward it. It's going to move towards the calcium, which is in the endoplasmic reticulum and in the mitochondria. And when you mess up the little calcium ions in a cell, you're causing major problems in the cell's ability to manage its own function.
Wow. I'm floored. I did not know about that. My goodness. I can
It's
see that
really
causing so
interesting
many
that
things
we're not
downstream.
noticing this.
Yeah. Wow. That's like darn near mutagenic.
And there is some evidence that you're basically creating the conditions that allow cancer to not only start, but to persist. Luckily, oxalate is also toxic to cancer cells. So sometimes you cancel out the cancer cells, but no doubt in my mind that cancers are stimulated and promoted by oxalate. Um, and this oxalate release is more the time when the cancer is going to develop. So it's in the immune system's attempt to get rid of crystals out of tissues, breast tissues, out of the bladder wall, these things, as it tries to recover from these crystals everywhere. That's really more when you're creating the cancer, because the side effects of all this hard work of the immune system is causing mutagenic changes as well. So these various cytokines and stuff that the immune system puts out as it's battling crystals creates the conditions where you get calcifications developing, because it turns cells into bone producing cells. You get this in the breast and maybe elsewhere. There's not a lot of research to say which tissues are more vulnerable to this other than in the breast. But it's been shown in a couple of small, very convincing studies that you can see how the oxalate crystal removal process kicks off the cancer process. And so if the system is also very stressed and acidic and have other issues, then it doesn't correct it. And then you really do see the cancer develop. In other people, they're getting enough nutrients and enough pH buffering or whatever, and they're not getting the cancer necessarily. So it's not like 100% of the case, as in all diseases. It's so fascinating if you think about too, like who's vulnerable and who's going to get it. And we're going to argue about, well, it only happens to you, Sally, and not me. Are we going to have this argument? Like, you're not vulnerable to toxins, only I am. You have to know that even with cancer of the lung, do you know what the main cause of lung cancer is that we know of, or that public health says this the main cause of lung cancer?
No, I'm not aware.
It's smoking, right? So
Oh,
cigarette
I would have
smoking.
said smoking, but I would have thought you were going to say that's not smoking, but it's
No, it is. It's cigarette smoking. And what's interesting about that is very few cigarette smokers get cancer.
Mhm.
Very few, less than 3%. But smoking is still the main cause of lung cancer, which is a terrible disease to have, right? Deadly. So therefore, if only 3% of people who smoke get lung cancer, then we should let everybody smoke, because it's only a few of you.
Okay, I can see the logic there.
You see that logic? That's
Okay.
what we should do. And that's
Yeah.
kind of the people's attitude about oxalate. Well, only most of humanity is being harmed by oxalate, but since I don't feel it now, I shouldn't care about it. So there's a real
Mhm.
callous sort of foolishness thinking, oh, well, they can't be that bad. Well, maybe it
Mm.
is.
Maybe it is. And maybe some people are genetically more resistant to it than
You-
others. And how would you
yeah.
know?
And what it is the problem, because oxalate can cause bladder problems, genital problems, kidney problems, bone marrow problems, blood cell problems, vascular problems, neurological problems, connective tissue problems. Like, it's just a matter of which tissue you're willing to throw overboard. It doesn't have to be your brain. It could just be your bladder, or it doesn't have to be your bladder. It could just be your shoulder. It could just be your kneecap. It could just be major surgery and joint loss. It could be low immunity, or chronic sinus infections, or chronic yeast infections, or other kinds of immune system issues, autoimmune problems, allergies. These can all be downstream effects of too much oxalate in the diet. So like, what does it mean to have too much oxalate messing around with the circulating immune cells, with your vascular system, with your liver, with your heart, with your lungs, with your connective tissue in your brain, and then your urinary tract? We don't even know what it is, because the science hasn't bothered to lay it out for us.
Hmm. Going back to your previous statement about everything being really more commercialized and economically based, it's rather difficult to say, well, because this oxalate may be poisoning the bladder, it may be poisoning the kidney, it may be poisoning your spine or your brain. We don't really know. So we can just treat the symptom you're suffering now, and it's better off for us economically to just deal with each individual symptom.
Yep. That's right. There's no incentive for the other guy to save you from this. You have to wanna do it for yourself.
Mm, 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 mm.
Exactly.
Wow. Wow. This conversation is making me say wow a lot.
Good, because it's a very mind-blowing topic. It really is shocking how profound the potential damage is from this and how cricket is. The world doesn't really wanna give it a lot of attention and fanfare and think about it and spend some research dollars and some brain power to really give this its due.
Hmm. I have another question. Are there any compounds or chemicals that you ingest along with oxalates that may make them more or less toxic?
Lectins are probably the biggest one, that the combination of high oxalate and high lectin foods is really going to destroy your gut and some other tissues and get you into trouble. Once you've ruined your digestive tract, there you go. High absorption of oxalate and all kinds of inflammatory problems and even some neurological and brain problems, including sleep. And then there's back pain. Like when your digestive tract is unhappy, you're all pretty miserable. So lectins, that's how I think I put this stuff on steroids and created irritable bowel syndrome by using beans as a major food for myself. I would put mixed dried beans in a crock pot and cook them overnight with a little scoop of peanut butter, tablespoon or two, and a garlic clove and a bay leaf, and let them slow cook all night long and then eat them for breakfast.
Hmm.
That was a complete disaster. Now, I had a degree in nutrition from Cornell University and should have known that not soaking them for 3 days and not using pressure cooker level heat to disarm the lectins was going to destroy my health. We should have learned that at Cornell. That's science is established and was back in the day. I should not have been doing that. And that I was already sick on oxalates before that time. I was at that stage, I was probably 27 years old, 26, something like that. But that gave me irritable bowel syndrome that came on as a post-infectious attack. So I went out for an evening meal on a Friday night at a restaurant and I got sick from that. I got a gut infection that I never recovered from. And that was really because I had the lectin damage already in the gut that was subclinical from eating this breakfast 3 days a week for, I don't know, 2 months or something. It wasn't forever, but it was enough to permanently damage my health.
Hmm. So you perhaps had premediated bowel.
I had yeah, the lectins cause, definitely some leaky gut and whatever it is that now caused the dysfunction in the bowel, motility, where you go back and forth between constipation and diarrhea, but it's mostly you have intense pain. So there's something causing intense pain, something's wrong with the nerves and the muscles, from that lectin damage.
Hmm. What do you think about sugar and lectins and sugar and oxalates? Do they get along? Are they friends? Are they partners in crime?
I think, in combination with vegetable oils, canola oil, soy oil, corn oil, these highly processed artificial factory fats, that with sugar plus oxalate is the triple threat. Sugar by itself, though, I don't think is an issue because glucose is what your cells, it's the normal currency of energy that the mitochondria are looking for post glucose. Like they want to be delivered half a glucose molecule to generate ATP, and having the right level of blood glucose is really important. So, and we use glucose and how you use it to get enough blood volume up. You use it for sick patients and give them a glucose IV. It used to be in my childhood when you were sick, you had a little ginger ale or cola by the bedside to give you enough glucose so that you could cope with being sick. And so by itself, I don't think sugar is really the big problem. The problem is the sugar comes along with chocolate, high oxalate. It comes along with Crisco and other forms of bad fats and a lot of preservatives and just junk. And so sugar is bringing a lot of friends with it that are quite bad for us. And so it's hard to separate out the sugar effects. The main problem with sugar is it doesn't provide any nutrients at all other than energy, but you need energy. Energy is a legitimate nutrient. It's just you can't live on it, and you can't live on donuts and these sweet things and Pop-Tarts and sugared cereal and these factory foods. And so sugar and factory foods go together so much. It's hard to separate out the two. And a lot of vegetarians who try to eat sort of granola crunchy, they're eating a lot of honey and a lot of carbohydrates, and a lot of them get away with that. So I think they're tolerating a high carb diet pretty well because it's not a commercial high carb diet that's full of the bad fats and the emulsifiers and the other things that we put in factory foods.
Hmm. So you wouldn't concern yourself with fructose as being something that might compound the issues, or glucose, obviously. I mean, glucose for sure, but what about
Right.
fructose?
The old days, they used to think that sugar was a source of oxalate in the body's metabolism. For so a long time, they wondered about fructose and glucose as sources of oxalate in the body, and that's been disproven that the main internal sources of oxalate in the body are the breakdown of connective tissue, that's collagen and gelatin, and vitamin C. So vitamin C is
Hmm.
the main precursor, not the sugar. So it doesn't seem to be directly connected. Now, oxalate, I've seen in a couple of clients where they thought they had diabetes and they were on metformin and diabetic medication until they went on a low oxalate diet. And now their blood sugars are fine unless they're in one of these clearing cycles, which kicks in pretty frequently. So they'll get some wonky high blood sugars, but generally their blood sugar control is way better without the oxalate in the diet. And this is I've read several researchers doing, primary research, really like bench style research saying, it's very clear that oxalate can cause diabetes and metabolic problems. And they never really elaborate on it. So it's a bit of a mystery in terms of all the mechanisms, but oxalate is affecting all the glands. The glands tend to accumulate oxalates. It's affecting their function. It's affecting cell receptivity. It's also affecting the pH around cell membranes. And cell membranes, they're where all these reactions are occurring that what we call life. And that's because the membranes have not just those fatty acids, but they have these big protein molecules. So they're embedded with all these functional proteins like insulin receptors. So there's a big insulin receptor. Well, proteins are folded molecules where the quaternary folds are things like disulfide bonds and hydrogen bonds, and those require the right pH. If it's real acidic because your inflammation is up and there's a lot of acid, oxalic acid and inflammation around, then those bonds aren't working well and the shape of the protein changes. So once you've changed the protein shape, it doesn't work anymore because these receptors require a shape to function. It's a lock and key system. So if you change the shape of a protein because you're too acidic, because you're very inflamed and toxic, now that insulin receptor doesn't work. But once you get rid of the toxicity and allow the body to correct the pH, then the receptors can work again.
And those systems at that level can't, in and of themselves, be damaged beyond repair, can they?
The body never wants to be beyond repair. The body believes in repair. That's what life's all about, is self-preservation, and it's all about keep going, preserve yourself and try harder. And so the body's trying, you just keep getting in the way. When you start getting out of the way, good things start happening, and it's pretty cool.
Hmm. Wow, wow, wow. May I ask personally, what diet do you follow? Is it still low oxalate foods, or I mean, when we talked about chips and stuff that you used just a moment ago, but like your primary diet?
Yeah, people want to know this, and I have to just give you the caveat. It's like everyone has to customize something that works for them, not necessarily be a copycat and do what other people do. And my diet is very customized to the fact that I have ruined my immune system, and my system is allergic to beef and all the ruminant animals as far as I can tell. I want to check with venison. I would love to be able to eat venison again. So I'm eating, but I eat a very high protein diet that's fish and pork primarily as my main proteins. And then I try to fluff it out with some carbohydrates because living on just protein means you start producing ammonia. Burning protein is not a good idea. So in order to spare those proteins for body, maintenance for muscles and bones. And I'm very muscular for someone who's turning 60 and who doesn't work out. Like I look like a jock for my age, And it's because I eat a high protein diet. In order to keep the protein on my bones, I need some carbohydrates. So I'm trying to find carbs that I can tolerate. I'm so sensitive to everything. So I use literally sugar and ginger ale to try to get some carbs, some bananas, some papaya, trying to find carbs that I can tolerate because I'm ridiculous. This is the oxalate has made it hard for me in terms of what to eat. And I use coconut a lot. Coconut agrees with me a lot. I use a lot of butter. And I'm starting to be able to tolerate cheese again, so a little bit of cheese. I would like to get back to having raw cream a lot and raw milk, and we're working on it because I think there's still room for some gut healing to get me back on milk, and that would be nice. What else do I eat? It's a pretty simple diet, makes me happy. I think of my diet as sort of the house cat diet. Just give me a can of tuna and I'm happy. I really love it.
Oh, that's great. It does sound very specialized, though. So,
It's
dear
very
listeners,
specialized.
be careful about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do this with all my clients. It's like, let's find out what's gonna work for you and keep listening to the body. Our job really is to humble ourselves, quiet all the chatter in our heads, quiet everything you're learning on every podcast out the butt. Like, please listen to your body. Please listen to your body and be humble enough to honor what it needs. And you do that, you befriend your body, you trust its messages, you really like, I cannot have that beef. That is, my body is very clear about that. That eating the beef gave me lichen sclerosis.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I can put that whole thing in remission if I don't touch the ruminant animals, but I'm very good about like no gelatin capsules and supplements, all of that. I'm very good about it because I like not having lichen sclerosis. Yeah.
Hmm.
We're in
So,
survival mode, but we're thriving on it. And that's all that matters is find out what can fuel you, keep you out of these autoimmune problems, keep you functional, and life is grand. Like I could care less. Like as long as I can find a can of tuna somewhere, I'm happy because I feel good. I've had enough not feeling good that nothing beats feeling good.
mm-mm. I have to say amen to that one.
Yeah. I'm surprised that people don't have that attitude. Like, boy, you haven't suffered enough. If you're willing to do that when you know it's so bad for you in the long run, like young people, they'll just like scary things they'll put in their mouths.
Tide Pods.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, young people will put strange things in their mouths. But I was reading in your book that even just things that we think of as normal can be lethal, right? Like in your book, it says something about, I think it was 10 fluid ounces of Starfruit juice can do you in, right? That's not very much.
Not very much. It's not very much. Some of the best research is done on behalf of Starfruit and Starfruit Juice. There's about 30 studies that I know of, many of them coming out of Brazil because they use it there. Starfruit is the spinach, superfood in certain South Asian countries and in Brazil and a few places like that. And when people are sick, they'll go use Starfruit juice.
Mhm.
And that's the last kind of person you want to be drinking Starfruit juice is a sick person. And there's been a lot of debate. Is this other carboxin toxin in Starfruit? And is it the neurotoxin carboxin, or I forget how you say that now, and the oxalate together that's the problem? Or is it just the oxalate, or is it the other one? And they wanted it to be the other one. But that other toxin goes away when you juice it. It only takes a little bit of juicing and it's not there at all. And the juice itself can be lethal, especially for kidney patients. So if you have renal insufficiency and you can't get it out fast enough, it can kill you.
Wow.
But it's
Here in
considered
Indonesia,
a
we have
health
it.
food. Even researchers still think it's a health food, even though some people die. Well, okay, throw them overboard then. Don't warn them.
Mm. So that's the thought that bothers me. And this is the thought that actually does, and sometimes keep me up at nights. I'm like, how can people in this? They're in this sphere of influence. They're trying to influence people in the idea of what is or is not healthy. And here we go, just throw Granny under the bus because, well, she had kidney disease anyway. But then we suggested this, that, and the other thing, and that had nothing to do with it, obviously.
You are touching on a very big modern issue. We have a lot of people who think they know things about health and nutrition, telling people to do chia pudding parfait. Chia is ridiculously high. And while you're making your chia pudding, be sure to put chocolate or cocoa in it and peanut butter and more high oxalate foods. And you can create this mega toxic, seemingly healthy thing that could be lethal to granny. Don't give it to your dad who's got dementia and whatever. You could, unless you're trying to inherit early, I suppose you could use these things for that purpose. But it's not funny. It is really serious. Even sweet potatoes, giving these things to young children, any of these vulnerable groups. In public health, that's who we're concerned about most. The vulnerable groups, the very young children, the unborn, the economically distressed, the culturally marginalized, the elderly, the sick, and so on. Those people need a certain amount of care, attention, and protection. And to be recommending these foods is healthy for anybody. The spinach smoothie, the green juicing, the gluten-free high oxalate bombs, the sweet potatoes everywhere, the almond snacks because they're keto, the chia because, hey, you can make an easy, healthy pudding. These are actually really dangerous ideas.
You just touched on something there. The idea of the low economic scale, right? A lot of our foods are, in fact, geared toward being cheap and readily available. Now, a lot of them also fall into the category of things that are fatty and fried in this manufactured Frankenstein oil and apparently high oxalate. Now, that's not by design, is it?
Who knows? We are suckers for convenience and what we think we're getting a deal. And we've been taught one thing that is by design is the idea that food should be cheap. And it really does go back to these Frankenfats because everybody knew that lard was the best thing to cook in forever. And butter was the important basic food that everyone had. But when Procter and Gamble comes up with Crisco and fake margarine fats, oleo they called it. It was a scoop of white fat that looked a little like Crisco, and they had to bleach these oils to make it look like lard. So they wanted to look like lard initially because lard was the thing they were trying to displace in your pie crust and so on. And then we wanted to displace butter with this oleo. They'd sell you a little yellow packet that you could turn it yellow. And the way they sold this stuff is that they could sell it cheaper than butter and cheaper than lard. So they would shame women into going, a proper housewife is frugal with her husband's money, and she's not going to waste his money on fancy butter and lard when she can buy this cheap oleo and this Crisco. And so right away, they learned to sell you the deal on garbage food and taught us to rely on fake factory foods and imitation foods. And manufacturers just taught us over and over again to be comfortable with fake imitation foods. In fact, they used to be all called imitation sour cream, imitation this and that, if it wasn't 100% the real thing. And then the manufacturers had legally took away that requirement to use that word imitation on the foods. So you think they're real food. We've gotten so comfortable with factories making our food and making it cheaper that we say that's the morally right thing to do is buy your food cheap. Get the best deal you can because that's sensible. No, it's not. We let go of this basic culinary standards. The US is sort of laughed at for our lack of culinary standards and our disinterest in the quality of our food.
I have experienced that. Yeah, I live overseas personally, and I can tell you that that is definitely true. My bold friends pay attention to that. That's very important. The US actually is marked out as not very intelligent for the fact that they do not know what goes into their food.
Even the people who have Ivy League degrees don't understand their food and don't understand what real food is and where it comes from. You get educated out of what you need to know. It's easy to take away culture. We've done this here for indigenous populations where we've wiped them out. We've wiped out their culture and their wisdom and know-how, and we've wiped out a lot of human wisdom with this sort of corporate model of how things are.
Now, is it just human? Is it just laziness? Or is it being on the low information scale that keeps people from rising up and going, no more, just no more. You don't mess with my food.
Convenience has lulled people into sort of a drug state where they really don't see the importance of it, and there's a lot of, social pressure, sort of pull you down to the lowest common denominator early on in school. I mean, you're supposed to bring in blue cupcakes for every birthday here for, like, kindergarten class, the acculturation is very early on where you turn 1 and you have to give the kid a chocolate cake or some blue cake, that would be worse. I don't know what's worse, the blue ice chocolate cake. Probably it's done. Like, that's the proper thing to do. If you don't do that, you're depriving your 1-year-old. It's so much culture, layers of training to fit in, and we do want to fit in. We're required to be part of a social circle to survive. A human being alone in the wilderness is dead. You can't survive without a group. You can't hunt enough and protect yourself. So we're inherently have to go with the group. And the group is pulling us in this direction that's pulling us all down. We're in a way, the phrase that comes to mind is like eating our own babies. We're committing a certain degree of suicide as a
Mhm.
survival instinct. So we've managed to leverage the survival instinct to manipulate people into not caring about the quality of their food.
Yeah, we got to count the cost somewhere, right? I mean, either at the grocery store or at the doctor's office, right?
There's a cost, and we're paying it big time. And the separation of our lifestyle and diet from the cost we're paying is intentional. I think that wedge is intentional, that we can't see that we're suffering because of the way we eat.
Mm. Wow, wow. Well, Miss Sally K, I am so grateful that you came on to talk with me today. It's
It's been
amazing.
fun. We've had a good time today.
I'd like to do a follow-up sometime if we can, if that'd be all right.
That'd be fun. Let's do it.
Awesome. Awesome. So if you would, I always ask my guests to give a little piece of parting wisdom, a little pearl to my listeners, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, yeah. Well, don't give in to that big culture and even the family pressures around you. Let yourself be humble enough to let your body lead you towards better health.
Nice. My word, that is just wonderful. Thank you so very much.
Most welcome. It's been fun. Thank you.
Right. Well, this has been Sally K. Norton, MPH, author of Toxic Superfoods. Y'all go out and get that book. It is amazing and so full of information. All right. Be bold, everybody.
From pain to gain, I changed the game. Carnivore life, never the same. Standard diet filled with lies, I see through the disguise.